Friends of Herring River presents a Herring River restoration project video. What's to come? Wellfleet, Massachusetts, 2024. In 1909, a dike was built across the Herring River, drastically reducing tidal flow. The herring run was decimated, and over time, the ecosystem severely degraded. After decades of research and planning, the Herring River Restoration Project brings together state-of-the-art infrastructure improvements and management techniques to restore 1,100 acres of coastal habitat. Project owners, Town of Wellfleet, and National Park Service. Video made possible by DER and NOAA. Rippling water reflects tree branches.
I looked at the estuary and I thought, wow, this is beautiful, and all these dead trees. I thought, wow, this is cool.
An aerial shot flies above red bushes and pale dead trees.
And I could never understand. They'd say, well, there was an island here or a duck harbor, and I'm going, what island? There's no islands.
An aerial view flies above a narrow river channel surrounded by dead trees.
It's been over a century since the Herring River estuary was diked and drained.
A black and white photo of a salt marsh fades to present-day footage of an oak forest.
Over all that time, this place has completely transformed.
Bill Bywenga, Chair, Herring River Stakeholders Group. Lori Warner, photographer.
So it took me a long time to finally visually get it. I realized that wherever the pine trees end, that should be open water, and that everything else in between, it doesn't belong.
An aerial view rises above a hill covered in pines to reveal a basin filled with bare oaks. Danielle Perry, Marine Habitat Resource Specialist, NOAA Restoration Center.
As the largest salt marsh restoration in the Northeast, the Herring River restoration is truly groundbreaking.
An aerial view flies above the river mouth to where it quickly narrows.
But working to heal an estuary that has been cut off from the tides for so long brings many complex challenges. So why do we have to invest so much work and time in restoring it? What would happen if we left the ecosystem as it is?
Geese fly up from the river.
We have an estuary that is withering.
Carol Ridley, Herring River Restoration Project Coordinator, Ridley and Associates.
Because of the lack of tidal flow and the deterioration of peat over time, we have hundreds of acres of marsh surface that are subsided up to 3 feet.
Aerial views show water pooled between bushes and trees. Megan Eagle, research scientist, USGS.
We noticed the impact it was having in the Herring River by basically kind of elevating the water table behind the dike.
Broken branches lie in muddy water filled with tall reeds.
And as the sea level rises on the seaside of the dike,
water ripples above marsh grass.
It would very rapidly transition to much more flooding, and eventually the Herring River would actually become a large open body of water.
A large water body fringed by reeds.
The water quality is going to continue to get worse.
Shallow, bright orange water.
For aquatic animals, including important mosquito predators.
John Portnoy, PhD, National Park Service biologist, retired.
They're not going to be able to live here.
Kevin Kroger, research scientist, USGS.
When we tidally restrict and impound a wetland, converting it into a freshwater wetland, it turns out, causes it to emit substantially more methane to the atmosphere.
Large bubbles rise in the river water,
which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, much worse than carbon dioxide.
An aerial view flying towards the dike.
We have an opportunity now to recognize that we could help restore the natural system that is suffering because of the presence of that road and those structures.
Georgianne Keir, Wetlands Restoration Program Manager, DER. Water flows towards dead bushes, a vast plain covered in woody debris and shallow water.
The return of salt water to long-impacted areas presents a range of challenges, both to the ecosystem and the surrounding infrastructure.
A young researcher kneels down to dip an instrument in murky water.
Scientists have been studying the Herring River system for decades.
Another researcher hammers a sediment core.
And have designed a restoration plan that allows us to anticipate and respond to these challenges.
Jeffrey Sanders, Chief of Natural Resource Management and Science, Cape Cod National Seashore.
The Herring River project is based on an adaptive management framework.
A pole with various instruments in front of a blue sky. A researcher observes readings from the instruments,
which allows managers to take existing data and new data and build that into the decision-making process.
Scientists first collected data to help us build a model to understand the functioning of the estuary and how it would respond with different levels of tidal openings at Chequesset Neck.
A series of satellite images of Herring River with colorful overlays. Diagram of tide gates in the Chequesset Neck Bridge.
As we slowly open tide gates, we are going to carefully monitor the system's response.
A researcher installs solar panels on a pole in the river.
And that information will be fed back into the model to inform future tide gate management decisions.
It's important to note that restoration is going to take time, and the Herring River estuary will go through a transitional phase before our restoration goals are met.
Many dead bushes sit in pooled water amidst young salt marsh grass.
During this phase, we expect to see freshwater vegetation die in areas where salt water is introduced.
Mudflats reflect the sun.
Some areas may remain bare before plants have time to recolonize.
Young reeds grow along a riverbank.
We may see more opportunistic plant species colonize new areas of disturbance.
Water pools across a bare plain.
We'll also be watching for drainage issues, as water may tend to pool in depressions across the subsided marsh plain. Although these events may look concerning, they are expected and temporary as the system readjusts to these new conditions.
An excavator knocks down dead trees.
To mitigate these issues, we'll be taking certain management actions before we open the tide gates.
Animation shows a subsided basin with dead trees and reeds, which crumple to the ground and disappear.
The project will remove freshwater vegetation prior to it being killed by saltwater, allowing space for salt marsh plants to come in and repopulate those areas.
A large expanse of shallow muddy water, a high berm beside the river.
The Herring River floodplain has subsided over time, creating dips and rises in sections.
Animation shows dips and rises on the basin being leveled and water flowing across the plain.
Sediment will be redistributed through the area, leveling off the marsh, creating optimal growing conditions for salt marsh plants and allowing tides to flow freely through the system.
The graphic shows tide gates opening below the new bridge.
At this point, we'll begin to allow tidal flow back into the river.
Animation shows water ebbing and flowing across the basin.
We'll start to see higher high tides and lower low tides.
Small fish swim in brown water.
We'll see estuarine animals begin to recolonize.
Shiny green mats grow across the ground.
In wetter areas, microbial mats will begin to grow, helping to stabilize the sediment.
Small red and green succulents grow on the wet surface.
Areas that drain during low tide will be colonized by salt-tolerant pioneer plants, like pickleweed, that help hold sediment and rebuild below-ground organic matter.
Animation shows grasses growing across the basin.
Eventually, as the surface stabilizes, salt marsh grasses can begin to recolonize.
A dense field of cordgrass.
Cordgrass creates a broad plain across the lower intertidal zones.
A wide expanse of salt hay.
Salt hay will create salt marsh meadows in the area above mean high tide.
Animation shows the level of the marsh rising as the peat grows.
Over time, the salt marsh peat will build again as the roots and rhizomes of these grasses accumulate and trap sediment, allowing the marsh surface to regain elevation. As the salt marsh matures over the decades, we hope to see the formation of natural creeks.
Animation of a wide landscape shows the salt marsh growing and the river branching over time.
The river, which was artificially straightened, will eventually regain its natural sinuous shape.
An aerial view flying over the river mouth.
As the ecosystem recovers, we'll regain a host of benefits.
An old photo shows men with a large net full of herring in the river.
Prior to the dike, we know that herring was very important to the town of Wellfleet.
Steve Block, Habitat Restoration Specialist, NOAA Restoration Center.
They used to allow the harvest of over 200,000 herring annually.
A school of herring swim underwater.
By allowing additional tidal water into the Herring River, we could restore potentially hundreds of thousands of fish back up to the spawning ponds.
That habitat is for, important species within the food chain that drive our economy.
A reef of oysters with the river in the background.
We want to reclaim shellfish beds that were lost due to bacterial contamination.
Ripples reflect marsh grass. Mosquito larvae swim in shallow water.
The restoration is going to provide a huge advantage in the ability to control nuisance mosquitoes.
Fish swim towards us. Huge waves crash.
We want to regain the resilience of the marsh plain.
A vast plain of salt marsh with a beach in the distance.
Reducing the impacts of erosion and waves on our built environment.
Bubbles rise through brown water.
We want to eliminate the methane that's being emitted by ponded wetlands.
Tall green marsh grass with the harbor in the background.
And regain the potential for the salt marsh to absorb carbon and help us address greenhouse gas emissions.
Kayakers paddle through a wide river.
We want to regain access for the community to a beautiful, healthy, vibrant system for recreational enjoyment.
An osprey soars towards its nest.
The recovery of this complex and disturbed ecosystem won't be simple, and many of these improvements will take decades.
An animation shows a flyover of a model of the river.
The adaptive management framework will allow us to observe and adjust our approach as we see how the system responds. This way, we'll continue developing our understanding and stewardship of an ever-changing herring river.
Researchers work together in the river.
And what we learn here in Wellfleet will continue to inform coastal wetland restorations around the world.
An aerial flying up from the river mouth and out towards the bay. Produced by Solano Film Collective. Directed and edited by Eben Portnoy. Written by Eben Portnoy and Danielle Perry. Narrated by Danielle Perry, featuring Bill Bywanga, Lori Warner, Danielle Perry, Georgianne Keir, Carol Ridley, Megan Eagle, John Portnoy, Kevin Kroger, Jeffrey Sanders, Steve Block. Camera and sound, Eben Portnoy and Shirley Kim Ryu. Animation, Kartika Mediani. Aerial footage courtesy of Dennis Fitzgerald, Michael Sestaro. Modeling visualizations courtesy of Woods Hole Group. Archival photos courtesy of Wellfleet Historical Society. This video is made possible by DER and NOAA. Copyright 2024, Friends of Herring River.